Welcome back to the podcast. Yeah, another week has gone by. How does life move so quickly? Right, this week we're going to talk about dealing with some sales challenges and how you can start to think outside the box a little bit when it comes to sales issues that you're going through. So one of the reasons I mention this is a lot of the time when I talk to people, whether they're sales leaders or business leaders or salespeople, they're often going through some difficult challenges, some issues that they're struggling to overcome at that time. So one of the things, for example, being that they've got a deal that's gone quiet and they're trying to work out what the best thing to do to get a buyer back on side. Or it may well be that there is a problem with a certain member of the team and they can't get it resolved. Or they've got a challenge where they're not achieving growth in an area that they thought they were going to do. And one of the challenges is for us as business people a lot of the time is that we go into this sort of repetitive hamster wheel element of doing things all the time. But what we sometimes got to be able to do is to think differently, think outside the box, and to look at different ways in which we can solve the issue. So what I wanted to do in the podcast today is just give you 4 or 5 different ideas on how you can think outside the box to try and help you solve that issue that you've got, whatever it is. By the way, I'm not here to, every issue is different. What you're going through is going to be, from your perspective, is a challenge. But the key thing that I do think that is vital is that if you have been trying to solve this problem for a little while and you haven't been able to solve it, then give yourself that bit of time and that bit of reflection to think differently. Because, I think it was Albert Einstein that said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So if you do the same thing but just expect it to be different, it's not going to be different. If you keep doing with the same email or the same framework you've used for a call, it's not going to be any different. You have to think differently and approach it in a different way. So here's a couple of things I try and do when I'm facing a problem that I want to try and solve. So the first thing I do is I actually do some self-review and self-reflection. And this suits my personality style because I'm able to be quite self-reflective, but it doesn't always work for some people. But for me, I think it's the starting point of anything. When you've got a problem, it's identifying, what your part of that problem is or what your position within that problem is. And the best way to sometimes do that is to do a bit of self-review and to say, okay, the problem is, let's just say the problem is a deal has gone quiet on me. So I would look back and I would then say, okay, what are the positive things I did in that deal? So maybe I engaged and opened up the opportunity. We had a meeting with someone, booked a demo with someone, or I understood the pain points of the challenge. I shared them some good information. But what are the bad bits that I didn't do? What are the bits that I didn't quite get right? It may well be that I didn't invite someone to the meeting that should have been there, or that I didn't follow up as I should have done afterwards, or I shared with them a story that wasn't relevant with another company, or I upset someone in the meeting by saying something which then put them on back foot. So one of the things I encourage people to do is just take that moment to do that bit of self-reflection. If you can, just get a piece of paper and go, what's the good bits I did and what are the bits that that were potentially negative. And I'm not trying to get to be hard on yourself or harsh on yourself, but just be a bit reflective. The mirror never lies, as I always say. And I did a podcast a couple of weeks ago about accountability. And the key thing we've got to do is if we've got a problem, is to identify where that problem's come from. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I try and get people to then do is to go to a different location. I try and do is go to a different location to try and think about ways to solve the problem. And very often I'll get a pad of paper and just take a Sharpie pen and go to maybe it's an area that's a park. For example, if you live in the city, it can be a park that you go to. If you live near the coast, maybe you can go to the edge of a beach and just get to a different location where you then have removed or turn off phone notifications, and giving your mind time to think is really, really critical. So the brain has 2 parts to our brain, and I'm not a brain expert in any way, shape or form, as you can see. But the reality is we have 2 parts to our brain. I know we have our I think it's called our limbic brain, which is the bit part of our brain that processes things day to day, and we have our prefrontal cortex, which is where innovation and new ideas come from. And the problem is when we're in the same routines as we're always in, it's very difficult to get into that prefrontal cortex, that innovation part of the brain where our brain can find solutions to problems when we're doing the same things on a regular basis. So a great way to be able to try and, if you like, refire that or re-trigger that is to go somewhere different. and to turn off notifications. So when you go to, let's say, a park for an hour and you turn off your phone, and maybe obviously tell other people where you're going so they don't worry about you. If you're in an office, you can't just go out and think people are not going to know where you are. But if you've got friends and family, say to them, I'm going to go off for a bit of thinking time at a location. Turn off your phone and maybe just get a pad and paper, and we'll come on to that as a third point in a moment. But take some time away in a different location and just take some time to think and be in a different place. Sometimes different places give us the ability to think in a different perspective. And if we then add that to the next point, which I think is quite useful, which is to brainstorm or to write ideas down or thoughts down, other things then stem from those thoughts. So what I'll also do is, if I'm going through a challenging problem with, let's say, that a deal that I've mentioned that's not going to where I want it to be, I've not heard back from someone, I might go to, for me, it's the coast. I love the coast. I've grown up by the coast, and for me, the sea is just a different place. So I can go on to, we live on Western Beach, and there's some seats on the front. And sometimes I'll go there early in the morning, or maybe sometimes at lunchtime, and I'll just take a pad of paper and I'll just write stuff down. I'll brainstorm, and I'll literally put the problem in the middle of a circle with, not hearing back from client, and then I'll just write stuff down. I'll just let my brain be free for a little bit to write stuff down as to, why they're not responding, or who's not responding, or what could have happened. And I'll write a number of elements down. I might, on a pad of paper, I might have like 10, 20, 30 ideas. And what I can then do towards the end of that session is I start to work out, okay, which one of these could be more realistic? And I'll try and build a bit of a plan from that. But I sort of let myself just write or put stuff down on paper. And I do that in a different location with notifications and other things removed. So giving your brain the chance to be free and have that element of thought is critical. And there's a great cartoon that I always share with people in a business scenario whereby there's a picture basically of the old medieval times of a king, and it's a great quote. I'll try and include it on the podcast notes so you can see it, which is a picture of a king, and he's got the sword, and he's going out to, he's got all the army and the war in front of him, and his assistants are saying to him, hey, there's a person here to see you, who's a salesman, and he's I haven't got any time to see a salesman. I've got a battle to fight, and it's a machine gun salesman, which in the olden times would have been really powerful. And the problem and the point is sometimes is that when we take a step back and give ourselves some time to think, we can actually then identify what might be causing the problem, or gives us a different path to take. So it doesn't mean to say that all the items and things you write down are going to be the solution to what you need to do. But if you write down 3 or 4 ideas, then you can try those ideas and you can try them out and you can see which one works, and certain ones might work. So it gives you that time to create those thoughts and to see what's slightly different. So go somewhere different if you can. I appreciate people say, I can't travel or whatever, but just give yourself that time to go somewhere a bit different. In nature, I think is, it's not that I'm being woo-woo with you here, but nature gives us, some really basic, beautiful places to go where we can actually just start thinking about stuff in a different way, which I think is really key. So once you've done the brain dump and you've got some ideas around things, it's another way that I will also try and do this, and I'll do this on sometimes on a pad of paper, is I'll work backwards from my goal. So let's say I've got a problem, which is, again, in this deal, I'm trying to get a deal done over the line. I will work backwards from the goal. So I'll put the goal on a piece of paper, which is to get the client to sign up. And then I'll write, okay, to get that to happen, what has to happen? It means this person's got to agree it. For this person to agree it means that I've got to then get in front of them and have a meeting with them, or send a proposal to them. For me to send a proposal to them, I need to get to a meeting to them. For me to get to a meeting with them, I need to open up that conversation there. So what I've done is I sort of work backwards, and there's, in 5 simple steps, what I've got to do to be able to make that happen. And I might have different angles, I might have different paths to that. So I might have the goal is here. I might have one path up here and another path in the middle, another path here. But I'm giving myself different options to try and solve that problem. And what it enables me generally to do is, once I start to, if you like, in order to make that meeting happen, I've got to speak to that person. In order to speak to that person, I've got to be able to get them on the phone, or I've got to be able to get them in front of them face to face. I can then go, how can I get them in front of them face to face? Well, the best way to do that is to see which events they're going to, or to try and speak to them at a different time, or do I know someone that knows them? And to do someone that knows them, yes, I do. I might have to, and then the action that you can take is look on LinkedIn for someone that knows that person. Oh, I've seen someone that knows them. Okay, get in contact with that person and say, hey, I know you know Darren. Is there any chance that we can get on the phone and have a conversation? Because I'm trying to get hold of Darren to make this happen. So by working through the steps, and if you like, working backwards, you're sometimes able to try and identify quite simply what actions you've got to take to get to the path you want to. And invariably, the answers are always within us to be able to know how to do this, but it's just that we haven't sort of like thought through the logical process for that. And again, I'm not a logical engineering type of person, but if I know what my goal is here and I try and work backwards from that point, in a mini step, what's a mini step that can get to the next step, to the next step? Yes, the end result might be that I'm 12 steps away from the end goal, but take those steps bit by bit and you can get to where you want to get to. So that's an example of where, especially in a sales deal, if you're trying to do something, if you're trying to win something, again, it could well be you've got a client that you want to work with, but the price is too, they've said to you that the price is too high. Work backwards, the price is too high. What's making the price feel too high? Because you're X percent more than someone else. What's making them feel that it's not valuable enough for them? Work out, because they only sell a service at this level, or because the person that's making the decision doesn't value that. Okay, what would they need to see in order to be able to value that? They might need to see some evidence, some facts. If they need to see some facts, then I might need to go and get some research. The point being is you work backwards from the goal and you've got a better chance to be able to understand some of those things. So working backwards is another simple way in which you can identify what's happening and give yourself a chance to think differently about a potential answer to a solution that you may have, or that you may have for a problem that you've got. So the final 2 points, I think, are also quite simple to think about, but maybe quite obvious. The first one is speak to someone that doesn't know your industry, that doesn't know your situation, that doesn't know your particular scenario. And, that might be, and, my mum, God rest her soul, was really an interesting person for me when I was in sales situations to do that. My dad was always in sales, so he would come at it from a sales angle. But when I was faced with a problem with a potential opportunity, I would talk to my mum and say, "Oh, I'm not hearing back from this person. What do you, I tell her the scenario," and she'd ask really, daft questions, but really great questions, because she'd go, "Well, why aren't they doing that for that reason?" And I'm like, "Oh, don't know." And I used to then think, "Okay, well, good point." So when you ask someone that's completely different to your industry about something, remove your barriers as well. Don't just think, if they say something, I know, well, I've got that covered. Just say, okay, what do you mean by that? Well, does that person understand this? Or have that person considered this? Or is that solution going to cause a problem there? So asking a person that knows nothing about your industry, but giving them the scenario of, I'm facing a problem with this situation where I can't get hold of this person because they won't reply to my emails, they just might give you a perspective that's a bit different to what you thought about. And especially if someone comes at it from a completely, non in your industry, they might say, well, if I was in their shoes, I wouldn't do it unless you did this, this, or this. And then you go, okay, wow, okay. They give me a different perspective to think about. Another great way sometimes people talk about it is, you can ask your mum, or you can ask, people used to ask your grandma, what would your grandma say? Or you can ask a child. It depends on how old the child is, but you can ask a child, and children sometimes say the most obvious direct things, but half the time what they say is bang on the money, because they know that they don't see it from a complicated perspective like you have. They've seen it from their simple perspective of, because of this. Oh, right, okay. So asking someone else's perspective is a good thing, but be prepared to take their answers on board, or understand what their answers or that they're giving you are. And then the final thing that I would also say to you about thinking outside the box really is just try and think of this from a different perspective. All the things that we've talked about here are to try and think about it from your perspective, but think about it from a different perspective. Can you think about it from the other person's perspective? So again, I've talked a lot about how sales and business is about seeing situations from, being in the shoes of someone else. So having the empathy to think like that of a person. And when I coach people and invite and mentor and train people on sales and selling, and I talk to them about emails, and I say to them, they send an email, so I'm not getting a response on my email. And I look at them and I say, okay, look at that email. I said, see it from the perspective of the person reading that email. What are they looking at when they say, hi, we're so-and-so, we do this, of your time? What are they really thinking from that perspective? And invariably, the things that they're thinking are probably that, this isn't relevant for me, or this isn't suitable for me, or they're asking for information, I don't know them, or whatever else. But I see it from their perspective. I see it as if I was that person. And when you start to see things from a different side of the fence, you become much more in tune to work out what's happening. So I try and see this in when I'm having conversations, and not everyone can have open conversations about politics, for example, or a strong subject areas at the moment. But I try and see it from their side. So even if someone's saying they've got a view that I maybe don't agree with, I say to myself, okay, well, what's making you think that? How have you come to that conclusion? Tell me a bit more about what's got you to that place. A lot of the time, people have come to that perspective because they've got some entrenched position or something's happened in their life or something's gone on. But when I'm then able to see it from that perspective and see what they see through their eyes and through their world, then it makes me able to make a better decision, because it might mean that I'm able to then go, actually, as a result of that, it's not worth even pursuing that opportunity, and I need to look at a new one, or it's going to be difficult to move them, to where I want them to get them to. So, I'll give you an example of that. Might be, I'm an Android user on Samsung. I had an Apple phone 15 years ago. Apple tried to charge me for music that I bought and wouldn't let me move it to my Android, and that single decision made me then go, I don't like the company. And even though the world's moved to Apple and 85% of the world seems to use Apple, I will never have an Apple phone. I will never have an Apple phone. Anyone, by the way, comment in the podcast if you think I'm mad, fine, no worries. But I will never have an Apple phone as long as I'm alive, because what they did to the company, and I just didn't like it, frustrated me. And, someone's trying to sell me Apple right now. If they understood that position and what it did at the time and how it affected me and why I'm in that position, they would probably understand that I'm not going to make the move. So therefore, it's not worth either pursuing it or for them to change what would have to happen. It's never going to happen. So therefore, don't put the effort in. So the point being is, see it from someone else's perspective, see it from their side, see it from their shoes, try and get into their world. And different people can and can't do this. But if you can be in a position where you can see it from someone else's perspective, it's going to also help you then think about a different idea that can help you, move things forward. So look, thinking outside the box isn't easy. It requires a bit of time. It requires a bit of thought. And we're all busy, right? We're all busy as human beings. We have busy lives. We're getting 101 mile an hour doing things. But, going back to that quote I said, if you carry on doing this, definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And if you've got a problem and you can't solve that problem, it's been going for a while and it's hurting you and it's impacting you, then give yourself that little bit of time, that little bit of thought process to look at it from a different perspective and use some of the ideas that I've talked about today. And hopefully it's going to help you come up with some different answers. Is it going to guarantee that you're going to get the solution solved, or you're going to, you're going to move away from the challenge that you've got? No. But is it going to give you a better chance of doing that? 100% yes. So look, this is some simple ideas on thinking outside the box. It's something for us as sales and business people that's really important. We generally don't give ourselves time to think and to look. I'm actually working with an organisation at the moment where, that the CEO has asked me to come in and take a fresh pair of eyes to look at his sales organisation. And I'm doing that at the moment. And the results that I'll share back with him, and it may well be that by the time this podcast goes out, I've shared that results, will be there's some things as a result of meeting people and having conversations that are really obvious to me that probably weren't obvious to him. But by able to bring someone with a different perspective on things, you can then move forward to where you want to get to. So look, for me, that's basically what I think is you can do to think outside the box. But let me know what you think. What else in the comments? What else works for you when you're going through difficult times or moments where you need to think differently or think creatively or think left field, as it's called? What do you do? What's the things that you put in place that can get you to that position? I'd love to know, because there's some stuff that I can hopefully use and help and work with as well. But that's it for this week's podcast in the main. But on thinking outside the box, it's a challenge, but we need to do it. Remember, can I get into that prefrontal cortex to get my brain innovating? And when we innovate, we start thinking differently and we start just being a bit crazy and a bit wacky with our ideas. Good things can happen. So as I always try and do, by the way, I'm really struggling for inspirational stories. I really encourage anyone, if you watching or listening to the podcast and you know for some inspirational stories of people that have done incredible things that just literally make them stand out and that make them incredible in terms of their how they inspire other people, please let me know. I'm always struggling for different stories. I don't think, and by the way, it may well be that I start repeating some of the stories from other podcasts. You might have heard a story in podcast 1, 2, or 3, or 4 and think, oh, I've heard that before. It's because I'm running out of them, so I'm having to repeat them for people that are new to the podcast. But look, I want to talk about a guy called Nick Vujicic. This as a finish of the podcast. Nick Vujicic is an Australian guy. Search for him. His surname is Vujicic. Nick Vujicic. And basically, this guy, brilliant guy, he's born with no arms and no legs. And I think he was born that way. Either that way, that when he was younger, as a child, he through an illness, he lost the use of it. And this guy's got no arms, no legs. He's got like a little stump for his arms, and yet he jumps into swimming pools. He is an inspirational speaker. He's he's got a Christian faith, but he's an absolutely inspirational person who is basically saying to kids and other people everywhere, doesn't matter what disabilities you've got, nothing should hold you back. And if you search him, there's a great video of him diving into a swimming pool where literally everyone's going, you're going to sink, you've got no arms or legs to be able to move. And he works his way out, he finds his way, and he gets up out of the swimming pool. He's just incredible. And I think when I see Nick Vujicic, I'd love to meet him. I'd love to, to have a conversation with him and understand what he's done to build his mindset to be in such a strong place after all the adversity he's been through. But just a brilliant, inspirational story. And I look at Nick Vujicic and think a lot of the time when I'm moaning about certain things, and I moan a lot. I've got some arthritis in my knees and some challenges that I face. I think, actually, at least I've got bloody legs. At least I've got arms at work. There's plenty of people like him that haven't, but they don't moan. They're happy. They're positive. They make an impact in the world. So whatever your ailments and situations are, have a look at Nick Vujicic. I guarantee when you search for him and find him, you'll go, wow, I've pretty much got it in a good place. So that's my inspirational story for today. I hope you can find his story and get some inspiration from it. But that's it for this week's podcast. As ever, I really value your time and your ears. I love sharing the stories with you. I hope you find it helpful and useful. If you are, then please do let us know. Please rate subscribe and make sure you follow us on Apple or Spotify, wherever you watch the podcasts. But also, more importantly, if you can give us a review and tell other people what you think to it, then that will also help us ensure that we get more stories and information and ideas out to people that need the help. So that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Take care.